All right, Ron,
Hey.
thanks for coming on to this new venture. I've been thinking about bringing you on for a while, and it occurred to me all the things you've done, and we finally got you here. We've been in each other's circles for a while.
Good. Wow.
Yeah, I think we first met when I was brought on as the program director for the Bronx Culture Collective. And it was a really interesting interview. When I walked into the room, there was like 8 of you guys. But, I've gotten to know your work over time,
Yeah.
and it's been consistent and for a while,
Yeah.
that's the thing.
Yeah. When it's so funny because when I first met you, it wasn't so consistent. I was just thinking about the book club and how we could create a community of readers in the Bronx. And those first couple of years it wasn't so popular. We like to think that reading has always been like this sort of love affair that everyone has, but the whole idea of like a book club was kind of new to a lot of people in the Bronx. They were reading as individuals, but not in a group, and they didn't understand those dynamics and benefits of reading in a book club. So yeah, it was a challenge in the beginning.
Yeah, but you got it done. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of the work you've done in the literary space, let's take you back to the beginning. Give us an outline of the Ron Kavanaugh origin story.
Born here in the Bronx, 1962, born on Freeman Street, Hunts Point area. My father's a Honduran immigrant. My mom was born here in Harlem. They met in Harlem, got married, had me, moved up to the promised land of the Bronx, where I grew up. My local library, as I always like to tell people, was the Woodstock branch. I was just a reader. I wouldn't say I was a voracious reader. I wouldn't say I read disproportionate to any other person I knew, but I was a smart kid. I was usually in the smart classes and things like that. So that's sort of indicative of whether you become a reader, whether you have that sort of curiosity that requires you sort of dive into books, go into libraries, just like loving books. Went to public school, PS 140, junior high school 120. Then I went to Brooklyn Tech. I didn't go to college, oddly enough. Brooklyn Tech was a lot for me, and I was like, listen, I'm just gonna start working. And I've been working ever since. And just in odd jobs, when you don't have a college degree, to sort of take jobs that are offered to you. But I always knew like people who had good jobs. Whenever there was a space or a hire needed, they remembered me, and they know my reputation, and I'm an intelligent person. So they always kind of like brought me in, and that kind of helped me make a way through life without having these sort of advanced degrees that most people have. Eventually, I wound up at New York Hospital. And this is 1990, and I worked at New York Hospital from 90 to 99. In that time, it's so interesting, like you're a reader as a child, then all of a sudden you discover women and you discover money, and books don't have the same value that they once did. For some reason, after those discoveries, I did return to books. And somewhere in the mid-90s, I got this idea of starting a literary magazine. And that literary magazine, for those who have read it, Mosaic Literary Magazine, the word mosaic comes from David Dinkins. He used to call New York City the beautiful mosaic. And I wanted to start, actually, take a step back, I actually just wanted to start a brochure. So that, like if you're a reader, sometimes you hit that point where you don't know what to read next. And I wanted to start a brochure, a print brochure, just to take you back how long ago it was, that would list new books. And you could read the brochure, and that would make suggestions for your purchases going forward. I designed it, sent it out, got no response really. Around that time, the mid-90s, I started hearing about this thing called the World Wide Web, the internet. And I said, you know what? Let me see if I can teach myself HTML. And that's what I did. There's no WordPress, there's no Wix, there's no Squarespace. You had to know coding back then. There's not even classes, It's not like a college system yet where you could go take a class yet. So I just used to look at source code and just figure it out. And that's what I did. Then I started, instead of Mosaic as a magazine, it was mosaicbooks.com. And that was my first foray into the arts. And this is about 95. So we are talking now 30 years ago, this year. And that got going. First of all, it was the first site dedicated to Black literature ever. And in a couple of years, we started getting mentioned like in Essence and Black Enterprise, and New York Times did a piece. So it started to catch on as a digital platform that showcased Black and Latino authors.
Right, you were starting to reach the people that you had wanted to originally.
Yeah, exactly. But there was like that gap where in your head, you're thinking analog. You're thinking like, oh, people are going to go into bookstores and buy this brochure or just pick it up. And in actuality, what happened, people found us online. So we never went back to that first idea of a brochure. In 1998, instead of a brochure, we came out as a full-fledged magazine called Mosaic. And that sort of really led me into the foray of being this sort of literary activist and how I could use my skills and talents to promote Black and Latino authors.
Right, and I've seen the magazine over the years, and it's really well done. It's high quality. It's on par with anything else you'd pick up at a newsstand, particularly in any literary section. So that was one of the things that helped that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I, as an aside, I've always had a graphic design skill. So that without that skill, I might not be here right now, because I was always able to present myself professionally, even from the very beginning. So, there aren't many websites, but I had an aesthetic that I wanted, what my website wanted to be and wanted to look like, and I just carried that over to the magazine. So I designed and laid out the first 43 issues of Mosaic. No help. I used to edit the entire magazine, so on and so forth. And so now we have these two parallel platforms going on at the same time. We have mosaicbooks.com and we have Mosaic Magazine. I was starting to feel like, now we're not making any money,
right?
To a certain extent.
But you got a platform.
I have a platform. And what happened was the virtual platform kind of led us to profitability. It was interesting because I was at a conference, at a magazine conference. This is in the late 90s. At the post-conference, everybody's like in a clutch, like drinking tea or whatever, having light conversation. And I heard somebody who was not in my sort of circle mention PayPal. The way they were talking was like, you could take payments online. I was like, that's what I needed. Again, everything is new. And I had no way of figuring out how to accept payments so that publishers could advertise on the website. I knew I needed that. Shortly thereafter, I jumped on PayPal, and it kind of took off a little bit, not much, not to the point where I could like quit my job or anything. But eventually it got to the point where the website was paying for the magazine. I wasn't paying anyone, wasn't paying myself. September 11th happened and the bottom sort of fell out of everything, and I had to take a step back. In the late 90s, once I start the website, once I start the magazine, I am committed to working in the arts. I just left the hospital. I was like, this is not working. I want to work in the arts. I cold sent my resume to the Bronx Museum with some copies of the magazine, and they picked it up, called me in for an interview. This is like 2 weeks before September 11th. They called me in for an interview. I get the job as like an assistant to the director of communications. In that 2 weeks before I start, the director of communication leaves.
Wow.
So I am put in that position. I've never done communications outside of working for myself. Again, I had the skills. I had a certain aesthetic. So I designed the museum's first blogs, personal blog on the museum's website, and just kind of telling them my journey and what's happening at the museum, but doing it from a personal point of view, because the museum then had a really large staff, maybe 30 people, but none of them lived in the Bronx.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So it was almost like all Brooklyn, Manhattan people who would commute to the Bronx, except for like the maintenance staff and the security staff. They lived in the Bronx, and myself. So I wanted to give that perspective of what it's like to be a Bronx person, you know, dedicated to arts in the Bronx. So I started this blog, and the blog was recognized by another larger institution called the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, and that caught on. So like I'm just sort of navigating what comes natural to me, but other people are taking notice.
Well, but that's usually the best way, right? You had the skills.
Right.
You had been doing it for yourself, not only for your website, which you did, you back engineered yourself.
Yeah.
You did the magazine,
Yeah.
right? You kept the design and branding for it that you had now on both platforms. So what you hadn't done is do it for an institution.
Right.
So it was an easy migration for you to do, whether you thought you could do it or not.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing about doing it for an institution, I was in the right place because I had a level of comfort of working in the Bronx, but also the Bronx Museum was relatively small compared to most institutions. So I could talk to the director, I can talk to curatorial, I could talk to education. It wasn't like, you know, some institutions are so large, they're on different floors, different buildings, so on and so forth. But at the Bronx Museum, we were almost all in the same room. So that sort of helped me navigate the needs of education, the needs of curatorial, the needs of the administration, administrative staff, and how we could sort of move forward as a unit and not one education thinking separately from curatorial, curatorial thinking separately from administrative. And I was by no means the person making decisions across these different departments, but I was the person listening to all these different ideas and thoughts and programming to sort of then materialize it all into something that we can then present on our website and later on our social media platform.
So you're at the Bronx Museum, you're getting a grip on the whole.
And I'm loving it.
You're loving it. You're there. You've decided to go get into the arts and ditch something that wasn't necessarily working for you. You're there. You have Mosaic. Did one help the other in terms of how Mosaic was eventually elevated even further?
I would say the museum did not inform Mosaic. Mosaic definitely informed the museum.
Bravo.
So we have to remember where we are as far as web design. It's still something that is really new.
Right.
There were a lot of large institutions that didn't even have websites. They might have had a page with some email addresses and that was it. Maybe you get like a little calendar, but most institutions still didn't have websites. And all the experimenting I did was on my end, which was for mosaicbooks.com. And I would just bring that to the museum.
So that was the testing ground before you brought it to
Right.
the institution.
Exactly. Because, you know, on the one hand, I'm doing something for myself and I could kind of be loosey-goosey with it. But when you're working for an institution, if they say they want it one way, it has to be that way.
Right.
So you can kind of experiment on the thing that you're doing in your spare time. But when you bring those skills and ideas to an institution, they do have to be polished. People don't really recall how popular blogs were. Like, blogs were as popular as websites back then, you know?
Absolutely.
So, and a lot of people don't get that now. What we sort of value around podcasts, people valued around blogs back then.
Well, I remember Blogger before I started Latin Horror website proper. My original genesis of the brand was on Blogger, so it was a big deal.
No, absolutely. So I was just bringing all this different knowledge and ideas to the institution And again, they were receptive. They could have said no, and no, what is this? We're not doing this. But I think that they knew things were changing. Like, it's so interesting. Like, they were always like, the old school, particularly the curators, they were like, no, we have to print the press release and we have to mail it to everyone. We can't send digital images, Ron. You have to put them on slides and take them to the New York Times. Now, sometimes the New York Times, like say, if you're getting a show reviewed or featured in a magazine or whatever, newspaper. Now, sometimes the Times or another platform would ask for digital images.
Right.
And they would, no, Ron, you have to take I was like, all right, I'll take the slides. It's not a problem. The world is changing, y'all. Please listen. They're requesting digital information. Let's be ready with digital information.
You do have this institutionalized process of how things are done, and they're always thinking about making sure that they look in the best light. Right?
Quality, consistent quality. Yeah, I'm not faulting them at all, but the world was changing. Yeah.
They weren't fast adopters.
Yeah.
I can understand that. So you've got a foothold at the Bronx Museum. Mosaic is kind of maturing in the sense of how you're starting to feel about it and getting it out there. You've got a little bit of income coming in, at least taking care of all the costs associated with the magazine itself. So you launched a conference. You talked about sort of getting an epiphany at another conference where you sort of struck you of how to make money, ingest money for ads, etc. But now you come up with your own.
Kinda. So this is my second epiphany at a conference. I'm working at the Bronx Museum, and the organization is called Hip Hop Odyssey, H2O. Martha Diaz, who is a world famous hip hop educator.
Know her well.
She did a conference at the museum, and I had never seen anything like this before. And I was like, wow, this is what a conference should be. There were DJs playing, there were movies, there was professional development for educators, there was like a hip hop concert. She was blending all these different elements. I remember just standing in the lobby for because my job was communications, I'm also trying to engage people who are coming into the museum. It was unusual for us to have this many people coming into the museum, like 200-300 people coming into the museum. We might get 3 visitors on a day. I want to be at the front door and make sure, put postcards in their hands, answer any questions. And the exhibition was called One Planet Under a Groove, Hip Hop and Contemporary Art, curated by Lydia Yee. So the conference sort of complemented that exhibition. And I was just so taken by the success of everything that was going on, but also how the community came into the museum, which was always a challenge. To this day, I run into people who will say, oh, I live across the street from the museum. I've never gone in there. What's it like? I'm like, just go in. It's free to go in.
David Gonzalez and myself are quoted in the New York Times a couple of times, giving them a little spanking for their lack of, of connections with the community.
When you and David would speak, we would talk about it in the museum. So, so thank you for adding a little fire. And they knew this. I don't want to get too far, but the museum staff knew this. At that time, again, this is the early 2000s, education is different. Education was completely separate from curatorial, and curatorial only wanted to do programming around the exhibitions. They weren't doing programming that was not connected to exhibitions. It limits your reach into our community. Because other than the hip hop exhibition, we were always featuring Black, Latino, and Asian artists. But they were more contemporary artists, and the artwork, as great as it is, wasn't as accessible to that community. So there was always a challenge of how you sort of balance, on the one hand, being true to your curatorial mission, but on the other hand, just wanting people to come into the museum. And I think when Martha Diaz did that conference, it really showed that there was a space and a balance that could be struck where we could do both things. That said, I wanted to do that for literature. After being at that conference, I wanted to create a space where people in our community who love books, likes books, was just interested in connecting books to whatever they were doing in their lives would have a space to do that. And hence, in 2002, I started the conference. I don't think we ever hit the heights of the Hip Hop Odyssey conference, but it did give me a sense that there was a demand for what I was trying to do on many fronts. So now we have the digital platform, we have a print magazine, and we have an annual conference. That's all sort of lending itself to building like a DNA,
Right.
reference BronxDNA, of literature. And not just literature, but literature, culture, education, and how those three things can be connected in everything that we do as individual citizens. So that's how I kind of got to that point in 2002.
And the conferences were amazing. And also, the 3 is a magic number, the
Right.
trilogy, the
Yeah,
triad.
Yeah.
A lot of things go together when you have those 3
Yeah.
things together. But then there's a saying in film, when you break the fourth wall. So you break the fourth wall by now bringing in a new program, which has been going on since 2017, if I got my notes right.
Yeah.
One book, one Bronx, which I'm seeing your posts and other people's posts on social, which you're getting like really good people showing up, not only to present their books, but you're getting a lot of people coming in to participate. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and that's just an extension of the conference. So the conference wanted to bring people in, but we were only doing it once a year. Somebody invited me to apply for a grant, but I didn't know what to apply for. I had never joined a book club, but I always wanted to do something where a family could come together, like a teenager and her cousin and the mom would all join the same book club. We actually started in 2014 as the We Are Family Book Club. That was the original name. It started, it stopped. 2015, we start, we stop. We just couldn't get it going. We took a year off. 2017, I get a couple of grants. So with those grants, I can now plan several book clubs all at the same time. Prior to that, I would do one, it wouldn't work. I wouldn't have a plan B to do another one. I wasn't really thinking far enough ahead. Once I got that grant in 2017, that allowed me to really plan. And in planning, it allowed me to promote to different audiences and print postcards. And we partnered with Casita Maria, from the very beginning.
I remember that.
And then, oddly enough, we were invited by Bronx Art Space. And they were doing an exhibition on feminine identity, not just women, but anybody who is identifying as a femme. And they said, do you have any books that you think could fit into that? And I was like, Audre Lorde, poet, activist, educator, she has a book, one of her most famous books called Sister Outsider. It's like a feminist manifesto. And I was like, I think we could try that book. And we really weren't having much success up until then. And when we did that book, 45 people showed up the first night. And I was like, oh, okay, now I think we got something. And since that time, we've been going steady, growing. And every book club is not the same size. We started out in one location, basically Bronx Art Space, and we try to move around the Bronx. We've been trying to grow. Trying to host like concurrent book clubs. So we might be at a location in the North Bronx, a location in the South Bronx. And after the pandemic, we went on to Zoom. So now we're also virtual. So I was trying to, the glory goal is to be in like 5 locations concurrently reading the same book. As I tell, sometimes people say, is the Bronx big enough? I'm saying the Bronx has 1.5 million people. If I told you that idea and we were going to do it in Boston or Detroit or Miami or Houston, it wouldn't seem like such a big ask. The Bronx is larger than all those cities I just named. So we do have enough people in the Bronx to do that. We got up to 3 locations last year, and we had to sort of scale back this year, just so we could keep everything going at a consistent level, that we're not like straining our resources. It felt like we were straining our financial resources to do it, and we didn't want to do that, because we get to a point where that strain sometimes breaks, and you just don't want to threaten what you've been able to accomplish. Right now we're at 2 locations. We're in person at Bronx Art Space, and we're virtual. With the next book this summer, we're going to be in community gardens. Last year it didn't rain one Saturday, at least before 2 o'clock. So we were able to get in 16 Saturdays of beautiful weather. And we're meeting at the James Baldwin Outdoor Learning Center, outdoors, which is on the campus of DeWitt Clinton High School. And we're also meeting with the Bronx River Community Garden, which is right next to the Bronx River on DeVoe Avenue and 180th Street. And they've just been like beautiful experiences to be outdoors, to be in community, but also to be open so that people can walk by and join.
Right.
There's no fee. From the very beginning, we didn't want any barriers to participation. We give everybody a free book. If you have a good book addiction, that money can add up. If you're buying a new book every month, and we were like, no, that's going to be part of our cost. Like, how much do we have to invest per book club? And they usually go. On average, we have 50 people, participating in some way in our book club.
You said earlier about people not having the time to read, but if they do come to an event because they're curious and they just want to be a bystander where someone else is reading, and they're kind of taking it in, but now you get a book given to you for free, chances are you're going to then read that book. Yeah. You're sort of also bringing people back in to the process in a way that's very dynamic and engaging, right? Because that's the thing. This is what you brought to the museum. Yeah. You had an institution that was working one way, and you help them sort of make the connection with the community as you saw it, because you were from the community. And fast forward all these years later, you're applying that to this particular initiative. Yeah.
But also, we're trying to make this space amenable to your schedule. And if you cannot make every week, that's fine. If you come the first week to pick up a book and you never come back, that's fine. If you can come just 2 out of the 4 weeks, whatever your schedule allows, we are trying to make this as easy for you to participate in this community, because that's what it really is. And that's the success point that we've had. We've built not just a book club, we have a community of readers. And we also tell people, if you haven't read the book, but you like the subject matter, come anyway. Right now we're reading a book called First in the Family by a Latina, Jessica Hoppy. Everybody has an addict in their family: alcohol, drugs, TV, whatever. This is what this book is about. It's about addiction, and how she broke through that. If you're not a reader, but you've had addicts in your family, then you can come and have a conversation about it.
You can relate.
Exactly. So we want to be more than, that's why I use the term book club, just to be accessible. Like, say, if I'm writing grants and language, I try to stay away from book club. Book club feels too small for what we are and what we're trying to do. I'm trying to build a community. Sometimes people will come 10 weeks in a row, and then I won't see them for a year, and then they'll just come back. And I say, hey, what you doing? Come on back. No fee.
They're part of the family.
They're part of the family. Some people, they go back and forth. They will come in person one week, then on Zoom the next week, then they might come back in person. It's all about their schedule and what they can do and the things that they can meet as far as the demands of the book.
But it still shows dedication. Now let's take this in a little bit of a direction, because a year before you start One Book, One Bronx, the Barnes and Noble that was based in Babe Plaza in Co-op City closed, left the Bronx, left a brick and mortar vacuum in the Bronx, or what we would call a big box. In addition to you, there are other people that have, on the heels of that, and probably also influenced by you, have stepped up to some degree in various parts throughout the Bronx. And I'm going to tick some of those people off. Anthony Tucker with Playground Library, Brandon Montes with the Northwood Community Library, who does this ton of outdoor book exchange, Noel Santos, who did the Bronx Lit Bar at Port Morris, Saresia Fennell, Bronx is Reading, the Bronx Book Festival, Latanya Devon, one of my favorite, just because of the concept, Bronx Bound Books. What do you think has changed since 2016 in terms of that vacuum, and also all of this synergy that's happened with people wanting to sort of plant their seed in the literary space?
You know, I think sometimes we have to hit zero for people to realize that what we're trying to do, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, but it's not impossible that anyone can start a book fair. It's not going to be easy. You know, I know Sarcia, she'll tell you it's not easy, but she feels fully dedicated to what she is doing. And like, I went last year and it was a nice event. Like, it is not something that she is trying to do in a half-hearted way. I think Colson Whitehead was there last year. Jason Reynolds has been there. She has in the Bronx, and they have good turnouts. She has good panels. Brandon, who I gave a bunch of books to, I can walk to his book stand from where I live. I love what you're doing. Please keep it up. Noelle, I've known from the very beginning. I believe we provided her, either the Bronx Museum, I also used to do a Bronx book fair. Either one of those gave her her first platform to vend and sell books. A lot of people don't know her story. She didn't just open up a bookstore out of the clear blue. She was vending for many years, and she was learning for many years just so she would be ready for the bookstore. She could manifest, as they say, manifest your blessings. The people who are dedicated to doing this are fully dedicated to doing it. They recognize that something's missing within the literary sort of artistic field. Something is missing, and we are all trying to work hard to sort of fill those gaps. I love everyone you mentioned. So,
give me your final wrap up of what you see, knowing all of these people, knowing the work you've put in, the platform you created, the magazine, the series, the creation of community. Where do you see the literary community in the Bronx in 5 years?
Oh man, that's a good question. You know, one of the struggles that we all have, now that I'm a nonprofit, is just fundraising. You can love what you're doing, but you still have to feed yourself. You can love what you're doing, but you still have to pay rent. And a lot of people don't get that. We will all be here. I don't know in what form. We might have to combine a few things together. Like I said earlier, like I thought I would be in 4 or 5 locations by now concurrently, and I had to take a step back, and now we're in 2 locations concurrently, and just be happy being there. I believe Noel Santos recently changed the bookstore hours. There are all these different things where it is not about saying no. Like, how can you adjust to succeed? And I think that's what we are all sort of realizing, is that you can't have like a hard mission. Like, you have to, like, your mission can be like silly putty. It can be changed and molded. You don't have to be so rigid about what you thought in the beginning must always be all the way to the end. You know, no matter how you shape silly putty, it's still silly putty, you know, so it doesn't become something else. So I'm hoping that that's what we all realize.
And as you and I know, when the Bronx was burning and there was also a crack epidemic, the People's Republic of the Bronx, as I often call it, were resilient and tenacious, and we made it through. So I have no doubt that the literary component of the Bronx and the work that you all are doing is going to let this fall by the wayside. If anything, like you said, it's going to change. And if we learn anything from the Bronx burning, is that you do have to adapt, roll up your sleeves, and sometimes pivot in order to make something happen. Well, I'm so glad that you joined us today on this episode, and we'll keep abreast of the work that you do and others in the community are doing. And we'll hope to bring you back if we keep going in another 5 years to see what your answer is at that point.
There you go. Yeah, we've been doing it for a minute now, so there's no reason to stop. But thank you so much. I've known you for a couple minutes now, and you've always been like a gentleman and a cool dude. So thank you again, and good luck with your new venture.